So, hello everyone. While some people are still joining us, I'd like to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as the case may be. Uh, I'd like to welcome everyone to this conversation where we talk about strategies for predicting performance during interviews, as well as inclusive hiring, and how do we, AI can enable all this. Uh, this should be an enlightening discussion about the intersection of AI and modern hiring practices. Just a word of like an upfront disclaimer: whenever we talk about AI and recruitment, etc., we're talking about enablement, how AI can enable humans in making better decisions, rather than AI making these decisions themselves. For that, we have done a whole different conversation altogether. I am excited, and I have three distinguished speakers with me. I have Angela Cheng, I have Ron Hetrick, and I have John Moreau. Together, they bring a lot of knowledge, and I'm sure this will be a great session where we will definitely enrich our understanding about AI's role in hiring, or what can it be. So I'll just quickly request each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Angela, you may start, followed by Ron and John, so that we can dive directly into the discussion.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. Angela Chang-Simony, and I currently serve as the Chief Human Resources Officer for Harvard Business Publishing. We're best known as the home of the Harvard Business Review. I'm a 30-year HR career veteran. Thanks.
I'm Ron Hetrick. I am also 30 years as a labor economist. I worked for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I now work for Lightcast, which is a labor data company. Was lead author of an article, Demographic Drought, and my expertise is kind of the current labor situation in the US in particular. Thank you for having me.
And I'm John Morrow, a partner with On Partners, based out of the Bay Area. We're a firm of about 75 employees nationwide, 6 offices, and we focus on retainer-based executive search. Clients would include organizations you'd be familiar with, like NVIDIA, Splunk, ServiceNow, Dropbox, DocuSign, etc. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. So I'd like to start the conversation with, more around predicting performance, especially during the entire hiring process, right? The whole talent acquisition process. Now, before we even get to AI, right? Let's talk about different data points and the data that gets generated, and how can it be a prediction, or how can it be a better predictor towards performance. At the end of the day, the overall process itself is trying to predict the performance for an employee or a candidate when they become an employee. And yeah, what are the different data sets that one should be looking out for? What are the different analysis that one can sort of bring in, and any other insights that you can add? And maybe Angela, you can start, and we can then go around the table as well.
Okay. So I think one of the first things I'll reflect upon is how much I think that predictive data has changed over time. Ron and I, again, we've been at this for a long time, and it used to be indicators like where you went to school and how long you stayed in place, where you sat in the hierarchy, that those things were supposed to be indicative of how well you would do. And fast forward to today, and we don't even ask about whether or not you went to university. And it's no longer a liability on your CV whether or not you've only stayed in place 2 years at a time. I myself have never been anywhere longer than 3 years, right? So a lot of our old conventions have completely gone out the window. So as we think about AI and its ability to really parse out the data that tells us something significant around the potential and success for candidates, I think it's really, really exciting, because that paradigm has just completely shifted.
Yeah, can I just want to add to that as well? It's just, we look at this history that we've established in the past 10 or so years where, ATS systems, applicant tracking systems were basically sitting there searching for keywords and using keywords to screen people out. But if that keyword wasn't recognized, in other words, you just expressing your abilities in a different way, then these things were screening people out who were incredibly qualified. In fact, one of the most popular phrases we've been hearing in the past, I don't even know how many years, is, well, the applicant pool just doesn't have the skills that I need. And I've always gone, but do they though? Are they really lacking it? Or are you just not asking is your systems built in a way that you're gatekeeping out a lot of people who are fully, almost ridiculously qualified, but you just didn't use the right words? And that is where I believe AI can really come in and kind of save the day.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. And I think when it comes to executive search, AI can really help us stay focused as well. I think oftentimes we, rise to sort of the seniority of sort of the credibility, food chain with our insights and our experience. And we were trained and exposure to just the right level of assessment and indication, trying to read between the lines. And to your point, Ron, to make sure that the lines are fair to begin with. So it's got a lot of potential, I think. And that's for us. We use AI to kind of generate commonalities amongst our insights, not the data, and not essentially kind of recycling information in dashboarding. Although that can be helpful, it's really applying it to our assessment and keeping it contextual.
Interesting. That context piece is definitely very, very relevant. And to Angela and Ron, to your points, I mean, what you mentioned about the typical conventions of predicting performance versus the keywords that someone is looking at. In today's world, right? Like if I bring it down to what is happening today, would there be some examples on what do you actually consider the most important aspect during in making that decision of whether this candidate is going to be a good employee or not, than what typically is there in CV? Because I think what we've just established is that keywords don't matter anymore.
Who wants this? I can take. Let me throw something out there in the beginning, and that is, so often what's difficult is that in the way a person answers a question is almost more important than the words that they say. You're looking for a certain level of enthusiasm and engagement for what they're doing, even when they talk about what they've done in the past. So the idea of kind of listening to a conversation and picking up things that, as a note taker, sometimes you're looking for checkboxes, almost like they said this. I was listening for this and I heard this, but you sometimes can miss the totality of it and just the quality of the conversation. That's still going to be difficult with AI. It's still going to, it really does rely on an interviewer's past experiences almost in, hey, what I heard here, within 5 minutes, I knew that I wanted to hire this person. Now, if we can take what you heard in those 5 minutes that made you want to hire those people and have the technology do that, then somebody else who doesn't have a lot of experience in interviewing can now take the brain of someone who does have that experience and then bring that in and use that as part, and kind of, it's bringing everybody to a mature level and a consistent level in the way that they interview candidates.
Well, and frankly, that's what we think is the power of AI, right? Is the ability to democratize knowledge and to bring the people who are less skilled up to the level of those who are really good at it, and much faster, much cheaper than that knowledge could be attained before. But to your original question, Manav, and one of the things that I learned when I was teaching how to interview, right, was that, for example, if you're interviewing for a customer service person, and the interviewer would be like, so tell me about a time. And of course, the candidate's got one ready in their pocket. But what I want you to do is now ask that question 5 more times. Because in the course of a day of a customer service representative's life, they're going to be answering that question, delivering on that service 100 times a day, 1,000, if not 1,000,000 times over the course of a career. So a single instance that's canned doesn't tell me anything about whether or not that person really understands what it means to deliver a delightful customer experience. And so those are the data points that need to be gathered, that humans aren't always good at, but certainly AI can help humans be better at that.
Well, it's known that humans are very, very bad listeners anyway.
What was that?
Well, especially when you're trying to take notes along the way and you think, okay, I'm listening for what I want to hear. This confirmation bias really kicks in, and that can completely derail an interview before you even fully assess somebody one way or the other. I think if so often hires, I think, are made and broken through the cultural connection to an organization. And if you're spending your entire time sifting through notes and data points, you think, okay, well, they're ridiculously qualified and seems like a nice enough person. You haven't really spent any time really assessing the cultural fit. So if you can leverage AI to help you kind of skip ahead to where you can spend the majority of the assessment around personality characteristics, value system, ethics, and credibility, that really, I think, goes a long way to making the hire stick.
Very true, very true. And and again, we're not very good listeners, and more of contrary to what we'd like to believe, we're not very good at multitasking as well. I typically say that as a candidate, I'm as good as the notes that my interviewer takes, right? So that's about it. Great insights. Thank you so much. I'll probably talk about a little bit in terms of building high performing teams. And one of the themes that I've sort of selected for on building high performing teams is, how do you get to or build a more inclusive hiring process and thus enable a diverse team, right? So essentially diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I don't know why it's always this way. It should be inclusion and then diversity. But yeah, so in terms of when we talk about the entire process of getting onboarded, right? Like the talent assessment process as well as onboarding talent. How do you see AI can be leveraged, right, in terms of promoting DEI? And while you're answering this question, I'm also gonna just float a small poll for the audience to know what they think. But yeah, please, maybe Ron, you can start.
So boy, okay, a couple ways I got this poll in front of me. Okay, so there's a couple things that, first off, as a labor economist, and I've written about this a bit, there are certain realities sometimes we're facing. So if you're doing something remotely, then you kind of open yourself up to a really broad candidate pool, and you have so many options. And I think it's really easy to execute strategy more in that regard. Although, there's still an element of, well, if I'm not seeing a person and how, would judgment even come into play? Where we see sometimes having a problem is that companies will execute DEI strategies and they'll do them across the board. And the problem is, in some markets, there's just simply no one there. It's like if you try to do a bilingual call center in Miami or a bilingual call center in like Des Moines, you're going to have a completely different experience in trying to execute that. So there needs to be some level of intelligence that's brought into that. And oftentimes the interviewer itself would not even know that was a reality. But I think that's kind of a future state of where we'd like to see AI go, is AI to bring in these kind of elements like, let's be careful about these things, or to make certain suggestions. But I would say in and above that, as we are kind of shifting into, I think we're all starting to take a look. I think Angela kind of points to this. We're talking about things as a skill set based now, and it's really not about the degree or where you work. It's, do you have these particular skill sets? And I think what happens sometimes is, I think with interviewers, if I'm a manager and I've been in a division for a long time, I sometimes almost start to get a little obsessed with the fact that I think people need to have experience doing this specific thing in this specific industry, doing these things. And you start to close down avenues where candidates could be coming from a number of different industries. And so if you want to hit DEI goals, a lot of times it's opening yourselves up to other industries that would probably have attracted a more diverse population than maybe you would. And I would use an example, and I don't mean to slight the industry. It's just an industry I came out of, which would be like the defense industry. It's much more, it's an older, mature industry. People have been in some of these roles for 30, 40 years. And so it's not inherently built to have that maybe a level of diversity. As a company was formed like 2 years ago, whose whole way that they were being built was like that. But if that was like a tech company, then you're in the defense industry and you're looking for people with a defense background, you're almost automatically biasing your sample pool of candidates. But if you open it up to say, look, I'm just looking for these core skill sets and I can make these people who I want, then you're probably way more likely to achieve your goals. And all that's doing is dropping some aspects out. But AI, I think, if AI can help a recruiter, an interviewer, a manager, draw the connection between these skill sets are what's critical to success in this job. It's not this or that. It's these things. Make sure they can do this. Make sure they communicate well. Make sure they do these things. That is what's going to lead to success. And I think that's how it can help us get out of that, almost like that ATS screen process that I was talking about before, which is so binary. You're either in or you're out. You passed a gate or you didn't pass a gate. And AI needs to be smarter than that.
Interesting. Interesting. Angela, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was listening to I was on another call earlier today, and we were talking about upskilling and how your French fry guy at Taco Bell might have actually been on the robotics team, in high school, never went to college, but actually has the intellectual bias for something that is far more sophisticated than working in a fast food restaurant. But if you've never stopped to ask that person about those experiences, that skill is completely untapped and unmined, right? And so if there is a way for technology to help us probe those things, and to your point, Ron, about skills that are either transferable or just not obvious, how can we use technology to really bring that stuff to the surface? Because now you've got someone who's in your organization, who's committed to your brand, who understands the mission of the organization, and has this entirely untapped skill set that can be brought to bear, and it's already there, right? You're paying minimum wage for it, but wow, in a few years that person could be really living a different standard of living, adding a whole new value proposition to your organization that we just miss because as humans we can't take in that much data. So I think there was real power to be unleashed at so many levels.
Very interesting. That seems to be very interesting. And John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think sort of in this concept of structured interviewing, I think one of the phrases that I've sort of used for myself is doing my best to avoid recruiting by numbers, meaning hiring or in presenting candidates to a client that meet the 4 or 5 sort of very like quantifiable skill sets, and you think, well, that makes a great candidate. Well, there's so much more to it than that. To your point, guys, if somebody perhaps comes to the table without the requisite hard skills, but they have all the right soft skills, oftentimes when you want somebody to launch a product into a new market, it's not have you done this exact same thing. That's the easy way to think about it, but it's do you have the competencies and the tenacity, the creative problem solving skills. And you can use AI to help you through a structured interview process script the right questions to uncover those talents, those sort of hidden competencies that would make somebody a 10-year hire versus somebody who's just going to plug a hole because of a great resume. So I think it's really important to be able to kind of see through all of that using, again, AI for structured interviews.
Thank you. That's interesting because you also mentioned something about structured interviews, and I think there's a very prominent school of thought that talks about how structured interviews can take away some of the bias and bring in more consistency. But I've also heard from a lot of talent acquisition leaders, and maybe my sample set needs to expand a little bit, but that when it comes to leadership hiring or executive hiring, people rely more on the unstructured interview than structured interview. It could be that people just define the structured interview maybe a little differently than what I have in mind. But what's your experience has been, John, in terms of exec search, and do people employ, and is that an effective way to actually go ahead and search for or recruit for leadership positions?
I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's so easy to take somebody who was the former chief revenue officer of a great company, put them in front of a client, and assume everything is great. So the interview can oftentimes be rapport building, relationship building, make them feel comfortable and trusting you. But what can happen, oftentimes you put them in front of a client only to realize that you didn't fully assess their actual skill set. And so I think using structured interview, whether it be about hard skills or soft skills, really helps uncover if it's going to be a good fit or not. I think it's absolutely important.
And I think from an HR perspective, the structured interview definitely gives you some legal defense, right? Because you ask the same question of all your candidates. I mean, that, for better or for worse, is a constant specter when you're making, especially executive hiring decisions, right? When you're talking about roles that have that kind of exposure to the organization, structure can be your friend versus just sort of flying by the seat of your pants and, oh, well, I've known Johnny because he's my daughter's cousin's baseball coach.
Everybody loves him. Everybody says he's great.
Yeah, that's right.
You should hire him.
Right. We wear the same brand of shirt, right?
Yes, right. True.
So.
Well, I think so. With us, I was going to say, we do probably, of our searches every year, it's something like 45 or almost 50% are diversity hires. And it's because we do our best to apply just such a thorough process. And frankly, many of our competitors don't. They just try and put people in and great reputations sort of sell themselves, and you just kind of let it happen. And that's very, it can lead to very sort of unyielding results.
Very interesting. Ron, you have any experiences with structured interviews, their ability to predict or build a more diverse team?
Yeah, I think the point Angela made is so important, which is people should be getting the same questions, and if not the same questions, the same motivations. Like, I'm trying to extract their ability to do what I need to be done on the job. And I think that's where structure can protect you, because freelancing is, especially if the person interviewing is not been properly schooled in what they're doing, because oftentimes we're reaching out to a manager and that manager may not have even hired anybody in the past, 10 years. And they may have some old tried and true practices, which are actually way more dangerous than they are helpful. And I think that's probably the best use of things. And it's what I was talking about earlier, which it may not even be that somebody is inexperienced in their job, but inexperienced in the way you're supposed to go about kind of interviewing somebody and assessing. I think some people, in certain things, whether you be in an IT or an engineering group, those people will sometimes get like almost obsessed about the skill set. Like it's got to be about the skill set and everything. And sometimes they'll miss the ability of that person to have connected on a team and working well with others and everything. So some pointers along that. And then you have other people, certainly, in certain sales roles and stuff like that, where they're so overly focused on, boy, this person's so friendly, but you realize, well, they haven't hit a goal ever like that. And I think that is, trying to protect yourself in that regard, where you want that balance. And I think this is something John pointed out. I think we grossly underestimate cultural fit. And I think we've learned to almost kind of look down on the word culture, but a company culture is such a powerful thing. I mean, if you're in a very type A, driven organization where everybody's highly motivated, a person who comes in who's very, introverted and very, just tell me what I need to do, and it's not really creative, is going to really have a bad experience, could tend to have a very bad experience, because everybody's looking at them going, bring something to the table. And they're like, well, I'm waiting for you to bring me something and I'm going to knock it out of the park. And I think that those aspects they're tricky, but they're not unsolvable in AI. I think, once again, it's that marriage between the interviewer and the technology. But then, this is something we talked about this prior, as we were talking about this call, and that is, what did you ask? What did you see? And then going back and reassessing that person 6 months, a year afterwards, and going, we asked those questions and this person answered this way. And then that has been true. And they were ended up being a really important quality for them to have. I got to make sure that gets more emphasis on the next thing around. We were talking about predicting behavior in this call. Like, the title of this thing is kind of in predicting, but the problem with prediction is so often people who predict aren't held accountable for the things that they predicted. Be like, well, this market's going to grow 80%, and it grows 6%. And no one goes back and says, you are incompetent. Why did you say 80%? I think the same thing that we're talking about here is, we want to use these technologies to predict things. However, if you're not built in a way that you're going to gather that feedback and rescore these people. So if I was looking for certain feature or certain parts of this person's performance and assessing them, and then you go in and assess them, months later, if you don't create that feedback loop, you can forget accurate predictions in the future, because it's always going to be, a guess, thumb in the air guess.
No, and that's quite true. Like, I don't think, in fact, I'm pretty sure we're not far from the place where you can actually go back and find the root cause of a mishire and probably fix your talent acquisition process, so that the feedback loop finishes, as well as you're able to make those changes to be able to better predict their on-the-job performance. Now, that could be either the kind of testing that you did or the kind of questions that you asked and so on, right? So I think we're doing a lot of work in that. The industry is doing a lot of work in that, and we're not too far from that place. In fact, we're already there. But that's quite interesting. Into structured interviews in specific, I'll just take a quick maybe detour, because we've spoken about hiring, and one of the key aspects in hiring is also candidate experience. Now, the reason I said it's just FYI, I've closed the poll, and I'm actually a bit surprised that most people actually think AI can improve the hiring process or the DEI through one or the other way. Like I had one option where it was talking about that it can actually increase the bias, but very few, about 13% of the ones which actually think that it can actually increase the bias. So I guess that we have a lot of people embracing the technology than anything else. So coming back to candidate experience, like the candidates are also assessing you as much as you are assessing them, and AI. Can AI even help with that, right? Do you see that happening in the course of time or the way technology is evolving? And
so I have an interesting theory about that, which is a lot of my colleagues are on a race to implement AI, and it seems to be that the lowest hanging fruit is in talent acquisition, right? It really helps to simplify and streamline the process, particularly at the highest level of the funnel. And I'm actually waiting for them all to do that, rush headlong into that. And I'm going to hang back and I'm going to continue to have humans be the first point of contact, because I think that will actually be a differentiator. I mean, I don't know how many of you get absolutely frustrated when you call into a help desk and you have to go through the entire menu of options when all I want is I want to talk to a live person. I don't want to talk to the chatbot. I don't want to have to go through the menus. I just want to talk to a live person.
Right.
And I sort of feel like a candidate experience is very similar, right? I am selling something to them and they have a problem, which is they need a job. And I have something that they want to buy. I don't want to make them go through a menu of options before they can talk to someone and decide whether or not I have what they want to buy. So to the extent that AI can streamline other things, I think we have to be really careful to balance out the things that are fundamentally unique about our organization that make you want to work here and not somewhere else. Because the best talent will always have choices, and we will always need a competitive edge, right? I'm not talking about the jobs that we need 1,000 of and anybody can walk in and get it. But for the really niche jobs where people will have choices, I need something that distinguishes me. And for me right now, I think that is the human connection. So I'm not anxious for AI to be the front line for me. I'll be glad to be proven wrong because I can implement it in a day, right? I mean, there's so many out of the box solutions now. But I am sitting back right now, and I'm going to use that, I think, as my competitive edge.
I think it's so often, and we've all been in this, where a recruiter will reach out to you and you're thinking, do they have any idea who I am? They're pitching me a job without any understanding of what I might even want to do. So I think AI can really help prepare a recruiter for that first screen. Say, here's how best to reach out to Ron. He had these 3 jobs in this amount of time, so that maybe as a result, he might want something more stable. So pitch the stability of our organization. Or he's had so many stable jobs, maybe he wants something a bit more iterative. So pitch the iterative nature. Remind him that they all kind of went to the same school or something along those lines, not to encourage bias, but more so draw that human connection. Now it's all being delivered by a real person, but almost the script of that first screening call is AI powered because of all the different trend lines it can draw and sort of contextual variants it can pull from.
I'm just sitting here, just everything Angela's saying, I feel like, am I miming, like coming out of her mouth? Like everything you said is just so dead on. And I've been traveling around the country speaking about, labor shortages and everything. And one of the slides I have where people talk about, well, it's okay if we, go through a serious worker plunge and everything because, robots are going to save us and AI is going to save us. And I'm like, first off, the robot army is not coming. Second off, AI the very first word in AI is artificial. It's artificial intelligence. And if you interact with people too quickly, you give them an artificial experience. And to your point about call centers, call center technology, routing technology was invented in the late 1970s, and it's 2023 and everybody hates it. So over 30, 40 years, we haven't figured out a way yet of handling this. And the reason why is humans are nuanced. Well, you're never more nuanced than when you're looking for a job, because yes, your resume, your CV says this about you, but you want to get out of that. You were trying to find the next thing in your life, or the reason why you even applied for this job was because it took you in the direction that you've been trying to go for the past 5 or so years. If you apply for something and you get an automatic response, sorry, you're not qualified, blah, 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 you never even had a chance to voice your mind about it. you've now created a really negative experience for that candidate that they're going to go make sure that they tell every single person they can, and they'll give you a rating on the job boards and everything. This company stinks. You're not even dealing with real people. I got bounced. I was absolutely qualified, but they wouldn't even talk to me about that. All of the advertisements, all of the investments you do in creating a good brand are being massacred by this experience that you're giving candidates. And God help you if you're getting a ton of candidates applying for the same job and you just blanket, AI respond to all of these people, not even saying, well, there are there are other opportunities that we could present you with, but just like, sorry, go. And then you post things in the future. Maybe you would like them back, but they're not coming back. And I think that this is absolutely something where we've got to constantly remind ourselves, like, I love John's point. It's there to make a human have more effective work. It's there to make a developer to not waste time typing code that they could just get the code. We still require that. What's going to separate you as a recruiter from other recruiters is the way that you utilize it to make yourself better, not in the way you try to offload your work to it.
No, I totally resonate. And I think what I hear from each one of you is AI can enable humans rather than replace them, especially in the context of talent acquisition and hiring. Absolutely spot on. I don't see it any other way, but it can bring in a lot of efficiency as well as context when it comes to, trying to deliver an experience. I am almost done with the topics. I have a few questions coming up and I'm very keen on taking them on. So folks that have been asking the questions, if you can also mention who is it for. Otherwise, I'm just going to go around robin onto the panel and see whoever sort of volunteers to answer. So I have about 8 or 9 questions already. The first one is from Peter, who says, how can the company strike the right balance between leveraging AI for decision-making and maintaining transparency to ensure trust among employees and candidates in the hiring process? Now, I'm assuming this is stemming from the fact that candidates inherently don't believe or don't trust a system where machines are making decisions, etc. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and how can one sort of strike that right balance.
Well, I can take a shot at it. I think it's like any decision-making process, whether it's AI enabled or not. I think there has to be transparency around how you're deploying it in any case. And even if you're not using technology, right? If you're just looking to promote someone, why did you promote Tom over John? And so I don't think that AI is any different, except that it's still new, it's still evolving, it's changing so quickly. The rules of the game are so much more fluid that nobody really has a good handle on it. So I think it's scarier than most other iterations of new things than we've seen in the past. But I think philosophically, if your organization has a bent for transparency, then they're probably going to be pretty good at explaining this as well. And if they're not, then this is only going to make this worse. So again, I don't think this is an instance that is unique to AI. It really goes to the heart of how organizations communicate with their employees and their prospective employees around how decisions are made.
Yeah, AI shouldn't be
human ownership.
Yep, that's it. That's what I was going to say. AI is not the gatekeeper. Humans are. If you're counting on AI to be the gatekeeper or to make the final decision, I think you are absolutely going to open yourself up to bias. I mean, we are seeing lawsuits like coming out of everywhere this year versus even last year because of those things, because people are trying to offload those types of things. Like one of the biggest problems with AI is it can't tell you how it came up with the answer it came up with. It's using probabilities, and it's not going to tell you, well, this is how I've arrived at this point. But you know why you're asking these things. I love the way we've talked about this, Manav, is that you were talking about, well, if I can use this to help frame the questions, that's a brilliant way of doing this, because I couldn't think of the right things to say there, and I couldn't find, okay, this is a great, yeah, you're right, this will do a good job of getting that question out. The answer and the way that somebody responds to that as an interviewer, and I'm holding that against the way other people responded, and I realized that person was ready with an answer. They smoked the answer. They had 5 examples of when they did it. Other people couldn't even find an example. Like, that is an easily defensible thing. That can be communicated back. You can fully tell someone, this is what I saw in comparison to other candidates. But if the AI is doing that, and if you're relying too much on that, I would just highly caution you, do not do that. Because if that becomes clear that that's happening, you are definitely opening yourself up for some problems potentially down the line.
Agreed.
When I share an anecdote to that, about a year ago when the tech layoffs were seemingly at their peak, I remember speaking with a vice president of engineering who said, you know, we used his organization used AI to essentially help him come to the conclusion of what 40% of his staff should he RIF. And he said it did it through a combination of checking the code check-ins with GitLab, GitHub, code quality, a bunch of different data points. He said where the organization that he worked for went wrong is it essentially took him out of the process, didn't let him deliver the message, and essentially fired his team for him. And he said, John, I looked at the results and they were absolutely the right people, but I wanted to be the one to sort of manage that message. And so that's where I think the company went wrong, crushed the credibility and the trust that they had. And they've been spending a year trying to rebuild it. Right? This is the organization you'd know. And I'm sure that happened everywhere. So you got to be careful around how to just still that human touch is really important. You can have help arriving at absolutely the right decision with AI, but yeah, you can't let it do it for him.
So I guess, Peter, then that sort of answers your question, that the one way to instill the trust is basically making sure that you communicate that when AI is employed in the hiring process, it's mostly to enable or bring in more efficiency rather than anything. Because as John mentioned, what was seemingly a very data-driven exercise and based on facts, etc., also ended up a complete disaster, right? I have another question. How do you ensure to meet your DEI goals in your organization? Now, this is probably a little broad, but maybe we can contextualize it to the conversation that we have right now. Specific to your organizations or the organizations that you serve, as the case may be, John, how do you ensure that DEI goals are met? Because that's something that quite a lot of talent acquisition leaders are always struggling with.
I think for us, our position is that we don't make the hiring call. We essentially present a short list, and then the client organization ultimately is responsible for picking whom to hire. But we do feel very strongly as an organization, and have so for years, that if our short list isn't 50% diversity representation, we feel it's a failed search. Now, to your point, guys, earlier, in some regions and some functions, that's easier, and sometimes it's next to impossible. But we still feel like we need to do our best to make sure that that's represented. So I don't know how much of AI can kind of power that apart from beyond what we shared already, but that's at least how we look at it.
I think it takes a real. I was just going to say, I think to ensure that you meet your goals, you have to have real executive commitment on that, right? It has to be the way you conduct your business. It's been a really hot subject, particularly because, we're right next door to Harvard's campus. Harvard is in our name. We are part of that community. And that's where the affirmative action case, right, really hit home for us. But that's not to say that you should be discouraged by continuing to pursue the really noble goal of having the most robust talent workforce that you have. And diversity, DEI, should be defined really broadly. It should not just be someone's ethnicity. It should be, are they neurodivergent? It's beyond their gender. Are they first generation college graduate? Are they an immigrant? Is English their first language? Is it their second language, right? There are so many more dimensions that can also bring richness of diversity. And I think that also helps to make that goal more attainable. I think we tend to think really myopically around what a diversity candidate looks like. And there are actually so many other ways that we can thinking about that. And that helps it a little bit easier for you to get there.
Makes sense. Ron, you have anything to add to that?
Hi, Angela, once again, we're on the same page. So I think, I talked about this earlier, John just mentioned it, and that is you have to do your research. So in getting certain roles filled, it's an astounding thing. I put this up on LinkedIn almost like a year ago when the DEI stuff was really in full swing. And I was like, all right, let's make sure we understand something. If we took every African-American who says they work in IT, and then we look at all the IT job openings, there would be one for every 1,000 of those job openings. There would be one for every 1,000. And so if you're out there saying, well, I need to meet a goal, And then all the other companies in your market are like, well, I also need to make the same goal. All you're going to do is cause musical chairs. You're going to steal my diverse employee so that you can say you're more diverse, and then I'm going to have to do it. But there aren't going to be enough people out there to fill these roles, which is why what Angela says is so important. Is we kind of lost perspective about percentages and just desires, like certain ethnicities, certain types of people want to be in certain types of roles, and they don't want to be in other roles, and all of your asking for them isn't going to make them be in those types of roles if that's not something that they necessarily want to do. That candidate pool may not even be there yet. Right now the airline industry is trying to grow a more diverse candidate pool, but they're not there yet. In fact, it takes 7 years or so to get a pilot's license. So in the meantime, you do the best you can, but you certainly don't put somebody in a pilot seat if they're not qualified. And I think that this is the way we have to approach this. Is it sounds great on posters, but it's really difficult in execution. You sometimes can be hamstringing the recruiting function by saying, well, we have to fill this in this particular way. Well, in this location, that would be easy. But in this one, unless you're willing to make this remote, there's just no way I can do that. So I think that we have to, let's not lose sight of the bigger picture as we're trying to accomplish goals for goals' sake. Or you could bring the whole company down or not fill the roles for a long period of time. And that in and of itself is really bad.
And again, don't forget that the regulatory environment in the US is changing, that if you were to set quotas, that could potentially be very, very dangerous for you, right? The SCOTUS decision was limited to higher ed, but it is coming for corporate America. Make no mistake, right? We had those, 13 attorneys general who wrote very explicit letters to CEOs in their states saying that any efforts to move the needle on DEI will be met with dire consequences. So you have to change the language around how you talk about DEI, particularly in terms of hiring and the vacancies and the roles that you fill. And that could probably take up a whole nother podcast, but you should make sure that you're doing that with caution while keeping your eyes on the prize.
Interesting. So what I hear is don't try to force fit DEI, and if when you talk about DEI, maybe cast a wider net, right? So all the proxies that we have been typically using, like age, race, gender, etc., probably need to be more widened when, as you mentioned, Angela, about neurodiverse and first gen immigrants, English language as the first one. Cool. That's really good insight. I'm gonna run a little bit faster now. So there is a question from Mark. For executives, distinguishing between someone who excels in an interview and someone who's generally good at their job can be really challenging. What are some of the great signals to solve that? I think that's a very, very important question, very relevant one.
Yeah. Well, I think so often it's easy to get wrapped up in a conversation. It becomes, goes from sort of an interview to a discussion to building rapport. And as I said before, you can oftentimes skip over some of the very agenda you were tasked with heading into that executive interview. And so by leveraging a structured interview process, it helps you stay on task, making sure if somebody said, oh, well, we crushed our number for this organization, or we doubled revenue. It's like, well, how did you do it? What was your role in participating and leading that, driving that? Or were you just there kind of riding the escalator, so to speak? And really uncovering all of that is really, really helpful. But it's tough to keep that in mind for some. But if I just boil it down to metrics and data, and then you add on top of that, do they position it in the right way? Are they listening throughout the conversation? Is there a fair exchange? Do they show good values, good demeanor? Would they be a good fit for the company culture that we're recruiting for? So.
And an AI note taker could really be helpful, right? They could help draw out how many specific examples did this person actually cite, or was it just a lot of hypothetical, like, well, this is what I would do, and this is what we did. Right. Well, what did you do, right? It could really parse out what was actually said from what you thought you heard.
So more
so often, you talk to somebody who says they were the head of sales, and then they think, oh, I assume they reported to the CEO. Well, sometimes they reported to the chief revenue officer. Well, wait a minute. Maybe they were the head of sales. What is the distinction? And you think, and then they're talking in circles. You realize, this person is not going to be ready for a boardroom level conversation or dealing with investors because they're not as transparent and focused as they need to be at that level.
But I guess the question also dwells about people who don't do well in interviews, for example, right? Like there's just some people don't interview well. Is there an alternative way, or maybe just change the setting that can help in identifying such people? Or how do you identify those people, and then B, what do you change for them to be able to showcase their ability. I'm just extending your question, Mark, a little bit, but
I would just say on this, I've always been a little leery of this. To say you don't interview well is a perfectly acceptable explanation for somebody who's a great coder, who's a really great designer. Like they could sit down and do a CAD drawing and it would blow you away, but they're just not very, relational. That's a perfectly acceptable thing. But when you have certain occupations, we'll go back to that skill set thing. There are certain occupations where the very essence of your skill set is being able to think in a moment, communicating effectively in a moment. That has to be, to say I don't interview well, would it scare me? Because that would mean that you don't have good impromptu conversations or you get nervous. Like, then I don't want you in a position where you're going to have a lot of these kind of conversations. And if they make you uncomfortable, it's like people saying, well, I don't test well. So you mean when the pressure's on and you have to do something that you couldn't spend a lot of time studying for, you didn't do well? No, that doesn't count. like the ability to execute certain jobs, it's inherent on those skill sets. So this, I think, once again, circling back to the AI role in this, it's understanding what does it take to be successful in that role. Don't ever emphasize something that we can't even correlate to success in that role, but do drive for the things that we know do. I think to John's point earlier, when they did AI to kind of look through these things and whose code was the worst and things like that, excellent use. I love it. Great. I didn't like how it ends, obviously, but I do love yes, that is a fair assessment of people who say that this is their job. So I think it's understanding that it's that whole one size doesn't fit everybody. Like you can't run everybody through the exact same screens, asking the exact same questions when what is successful in that role is going to be different.
Yeah.
And I hope we haven't pissed off any developers or design candidates.
I'm saying not necessarily.
Jumping on to the next one, and this one's really interesting because I think this is a problem that people are facing now. A lot of the people or talent acquisition leaders that I talk to now is that we feel like we post a position on LinkedIn and boom, within the next 24 hours, we have like 500 applications coming in. How do you handle such a large quantum of applications without applying for a single role, right? Without applying any kind of, well, you can say AI, or I would just extend it slightly over an automated decision making to screen them. Like, what's the right approach to sort of address something like this?
I think if you're using a system to filter through keywords, that creates a lot of bias and a lot of missed opportunity. If you're using contextual AI to say, hold on, there are some keywords, not others, or there are different versions of those keywords, but the patterns underneath someone's experience demonstrate the following core competencies that you'd like. If that takes 1,000 people down to 50 great candidates, to me, that's a win.
And you could have very realistically 50 great candidates out of 1,000. You probably have more than that.
But nobody has time to go through
this is what we were saying.
Of course, use a tool.
Yeah, and this was the post that I kind of caused a big stir with. Was AI needs to take us to the next level of. There are people who, there's several kinds of candidates, right? There's the aspiring candidates. So they're the ones who are trying to go to the next level. So they don't really have the experience that you want, but they aspire to be that next level. Then there are people who went to the next level and are actually trying to go backwards a bit in their career. And I've talked to many people who are like that. They're like, look, I was here as an executive, but I don't want to be an executive. I actually want to go back to just being sales again. And so they're perfectly qualified. And then you have that person who sits right in that sweet spot, which is they have exactly the amount of experience that you want, doing exactly those things. And what happens is a lot of the aspiring candidates clog it up, because they're all trying to make that jump. So they're going to apply for every single role that's out there. And it gums up the system to the point where people start putting a lot of gates into the ATS to try to weed all of these people out. And this is where I don't know where AI is yet on this, but boy, we could really use help when it comes to that. And I think what John just said of this contextual, like, look, I'm just looking for somebody who has like a couple of years experience, who's really going to be happy in a role like this. So maybe somebody who has a lot of experience doing this isn't going to be happy because they're just job hopping. I noticed that they keep taking the same job. It's just in a different company. So maybe they're just not a person who can be pleased. But I think that I don't have the answer for the whole point of artificial intelligence is supposed to help you get the answer that you don't have, because I don't have that answer. But when I put that post up, the post went insane. And where it went insane the most was people were so attached to it because they were the ones who were that I'm perfectly qualified, but I can't be seen because there's so much noise in the system that my qualifications are being lost. And a lot of times, like I said, it's that aspiring group of people who are out there just spamming everything. So here was my suggestion at the time. I would like to see the systems punish people who spam job openings. So in other words, it assesses these are the jobs that you're perfectly qualified for, but we notice you applied for 200 jobs. So we're going to make it harder for you to be seen in those things that you're not qualified for because you're spamming this board and you're gumming it up for the people who are absolutely qualified for it. If you don't use it in that way, I don't see how you can ever get out of this problem. And that's just my suggestion, but it was like, I will say the post was very popular. People agreed with me, but I was just more of trying to stir up the pot.
No,
Well, and I think to the person who asked the question, Manav, I'm gonna help you let yourself off the hook. There is no good way to sift through 1,000 candidates when you only have a single opening. So give yourself a pass, right? There's no way that you can commit yourself to really giving each one a thorough read. I mean, as a parallel, college applications on their first read get 90 seconds. So for all the blood, sweat, and tears your poor high school senior is putting in, that's all they get is 90 seconds. It's on the second and third read that they really get the deep dive. And so your 1,000 candidates shouldn't expect any more than that, if any at all, right? If they don't meet the bare qualifications, don't feel bad about just sticking them in the do not hire pile and really focus on the 100 that get you down to the 20. So I share your pain. But if it wasn't AI, it was another filter. I mean, that's the pain of not yet having the experience to rise to the cream of the crop. I mean, that's how the selection process works. So you're not going to get 1,000 candidates who are going to perfectly fulfill all your qualities. So you can sleep better at night knowing that what you're doing is probably getting you the right candidates anyway.
I think I had a similar advice as well, right? Like I know everyone has to fill the position yesterday, but when you're in a position like this, I guess a quality hire and well thought and well informed hire would actually be much more beneficial to you than a fast hire, which could be either way, right? So, and to your point, Ron, I think that's a very interesting product idea for job boards as well. I would not go to the extremes of maybe punishing them or at least calling them out without.
How about this? I mean, if you could have generative AI present to you a layer on your job posting that says, okay, it will prevent the situation where everybody can apply. So let's say you send your resume for a job you'd love to have, the AI bot responds saying, thank you. It doesn't look like you've done this or this or this. Have you or have you not? And if you simply have not, then you're just not qualified. And it's like, I'm sorry, you cannot submit a resume unless you can convince me or convince the bot that you've checked these boxes. And of course you can lie, of course, but it does get away from
if you lie, that'll catch up to you also.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not unlike the Common App, again, going back to the college process, right? Universities suddenly saw way more underqualified kids applying because they could just hit send to 20 more schools that ordinarily they wouldn't apply to because they were answering the same questions. They'd done the work anyway. And most of the students knew they didn't have a shot down below to get in. So they are just gumming up the works.
I have a comment from Dean, and I think this is after that whole transparency discussion about AI. A good AI tool, and Dean, I acknowledge your comment, a good AI tool is not a black box, but will be able to show the exact path and how it came to its decision, right? So the whole building the trust and so on. And yes, in a euphoric world, we'd like all the systems to be like that. Absolutely. Thank you, Dean. I'll take this one last question. Maybe we can briefly address it. And I think we have, but I'll still open it up. How comfortable are you with the introduction of AI in an interview, right? So like an assistant or an AI enabler during your interviews? This is Alyssa is asking this question, and yeah, if anyone wants to take a dig at it. I think we have covered a few bits of it, like note taking, suggesting questions, etc. But if there are more thoughts or anyone wants to build on it.
Well, I don't know if the technology exists, but if it could listen and run alongside a live interview and feed me questions based upon what it's hearing, again, I think to what you said at the very beginning of the session, Manav, is that the AI is an enabler. It is not a replacement. It is not to take the place of what is human intelligence. But if that exists, I think that would be hugely helpful.
It does exist.
That's right. Look at
There we
that.
go.
Perfect
Great
softball
stuff.
for
Great.
you.
Way to segue into that.
Yes.
Well, I think if you could also find a way to have AI help read like the emotional exchange of an interview. Let's say some people are just, all they want to do is make an interviewee squirm, right? And as a result, they may not get comfortable to give their best showing. And so if the AI tool could say, you know, you're making the candidate defensive, or you're not letting them finish their questions, or something along those lines, that would be a nice way to help kind of temper some of the conversation. You know, you should have enough emotional intelligence as an interviewer to kind of get that already, but not always.
Manav, build that in.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, all the audience and all the panelists. I think it was a very, very enriching as well as enjoyable discussion. I had a lot of fun. I don't know about you guys. In case, and I'm just taking the liberty of telling our audience that in case they want to connect with you guys over LinkedIn and ask more questions or want to send them to me, we'll be happy to address those as well. Well, once again, Ron, Angela, John, thank you so much for taking the time out. I really appreciate it and really insightful. And thank you to all the audience who've stuck around with us for the complete hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Good day.
Enjoyed it.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.